Cornerstone. If this is your first Sunday here, I'm Larry, the student minister, and I'm not usually the one up here talking. So, try again next week if this is not good. Today I'm talking about something that, unfortunately, this year I've had plenty of experience with. Confronting unresolved conflict. We've all sat in the weight of unresolved conflict before. It's not a comfortable place to be in. And we experience it in different ways, maybe. Sometimes you're at odds with someone you really care about, and there's just this feeling of anxiety, this sick feeling in your stomach. You might lose this relationship that you value. Sometimes it's just sitting in anger, right? Saying to your wife, this guy keeps doing this thing, and I swear to you, if he does it one more time, and we won't get into what follows that, but you're about to snap, right? Maybe you know that you're going to see this person again soon. There's this thing hanging in the air, and it's going to be bad. There's going to be this blow up. Your heart's thumping. The adrenaline's pumping. You got the shakes, right? It's not comfortable to sit in unresolved conflict. Conflict is not comfortable. Most of us do not enjoy conflict. And those of us who do handle it entirely inappropriately. Conflicts, someone just said they love conflict. Relatable. All right, don't get in a fight with that guy. But most people don't enjoy conflict. It's not pleasant. It's messy. It gets mean. People get hurt. Most of us would rather just completely avoid it altogether if that's an option. But here's the thing. For Christians, leaving conflict unresolved is actually not an option. And Jesus is pretty clear about that. We're going to be in Matthew chapter 5, if you want to turn there with me. Starting in verse 21, Jesus says, "You have heard that it was said to an older generation, 'Do not murder, and whoever murders will be subjected to judgment. But I say to you that anyone who is angry with a brother will be subjected to judgment. And whoever insults a brother will be brought before the council, and whoever says fool will be sent to fiery hell. So then if you bring your gift to the altar and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there in front of the altar. First go and be reconciled to your brother, and then come and present your gift. Reach agreement quickly with your accuser while on the way to court, or he may hand you over to the judge, and the judge hands you over to the warden, and you will be thrown into prison. I tell you the truth, you will never get out of there until you have paid the last penny.'" This passage has always really stood out to me for a number of reasons. I mean, right out of the gates, Jesus says something that's kind of crazy, right? You've heard it said, "Do not murder," and then he proceeds to say, but being angry towards your brother, burning in anger, unresolved anger, it's just as bad as murder. He elevates it to the point that resolving conflict is so important that he tells people to prioritize it above making sacrifices at the temple. Conflict needs to be handled before we go to worship God. It's that big a deal. Because unresolved conflict affects the individual and the community in big ways. The more that we leave hanging out there, the more of a foothold the devil's going to gain. Ephesians chapter 4. I made an error in my notes, and it could have gotten funny. But we're going to avoid that. Starting in verse 25. Ephesians 4, verse 25 says, "Therefore, having laid aside falsehood, each one of you speak the truth with his neighbor, for we are members of one another. Be angry and do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on the cause of your anger. Do not give the devil an opportunity. The one who steals must steal no longer. Rather, he must labor doing good with his own hands so that he may have something to share with the one who has need. You must let no unwholesome word come out of your mouth, but only what is beneficial for the building up of the one in need, that it may give grace to those who hear. And do not grieve the Holy Spirit of God, by whom you were sealed for the day of redemption. You must put away every kind of bitterness, anger, wrath, quarreling, and evil, slanderous talk. Instead, be kind to one another, compassionate, forgiving one another just as God in Christ also forgave you." It's damaging for sinful behavior to go uncorrected. And if you go to correct sinful behavior, there's going to be conflict. It's damaging for unresolved conflict to just hang around in the air. It's damaging to individuals, and it's damaging to the community. In his letter from a Birmingham prison, Martin Luther King talked about the greatest stumbling block for black people in their stride toward freedom. He said that it is not the white Citizens Council or the Ku Klux Klaner, but the white moderate who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice, who constantly says, I agree with you in the goal you seek, but I cannot agree with your methods of direct action. And he took that stance several times, that one of the worst things that we can do is to just try to pretend there's no problem, but to try to avoid tension. Because when we avoid the tension, the uncomfortableness of conflict, it doesn't actually make the conflict go away. It just gives the conflict cover to grow and spread, to fester. It's like when I was a kid, I fractured my ankle in a game of football, and my stepdad thought that I had sprained my ankle, so his solution was to walk it off. You can walk off a sprain, but walking off a fracture, eventually that's really not good for the fracture. When we gloss over conflict, it's that. There's this fracture in the relationship, and if we just pretend it's not there, try to go on business as usual, we're just stressing it over and over. I forgot this is not a solid podium. And it will reach a point where eventually that conflict's going to explode out in an even worse way than it would have been if it had been dealt with from the get-go. Dr. King talked about this false peace also in regard to Autherman Lucy, the first African-American woman accepted to the University of Alabama, who was quickly dismissed from the University of Alabama for her safety and the safety of the school because of how bad the backlash to her being accepted was. And following that incident, once she was removed from the school, the newspapers ran that there was now peace in Alabama. Alabama was now peaceful. And Dr. King said, this is the type of peace that all men of goodwill hate. It is the type of peace that is obnoxious. It is the type of peace that stinks in the nostrils of the Almighty God. Christians are called to be peacemakers. And what that means is not that we are called to be people who gloss over and pretend there are no issues. We don't get to ignore conflict. We're to sow that positive peace where justice is found, where issues are resolved, where healing can actually happen. When we don't do that, we provide just ground for all kinds of terrible things to happen. When we gloss over wrongdoing, we provide fertile soil for ongoing abuse of people. The recent Catholic Church scandal, we've seen where glossing over abusive behavior has just allowed it to go on, and many more people to be hurt by it than if it had just been addressed. And it doesn't just happen in Catholic churches. It happens in Protestant churches. It happens in any situation where people have the opportunity to abuse another person. If it goes on unchecked, unconfronted, we're no better for allowing it to happen than the ones who perpetrate it, if we know something's being done and we don't confront it. We don't have the option of covering up wrongdoing. And when we cover it up, we allow it to go on, and sinful behavior spreads through the group, becomes more permitted, more acceptable. And Dr. King was absolutely right that this desire for easy, quiet absence of tension over the pursuit of peace is a stumbling block in large-scale societal change. It's also a stumbling block in the relationships within an individual congregation, but it's also a stumbling block in our individual relationships. I see that desire for a lack of tension play out one-on-one just as much as I see it play out in the overarching us as a whole, as a society. We don't like conflict, and that's perhaps even more true here in the South. We don't want to get into the fight. We don't want to have the argument. We don't want to have the tough discussion. We just want to pretend it's fine and go on as though everything is normal, but that's not an option. It gives the devil an opportunity, Ephesians says here. What that means is unresolved conflict gives him this foothold, this stronghold, this place from which he can launch more extended attacks, better attacks, stronger attacks. It becomes a breeding ground for bitterness, which can multiply sins and agitate wounds. Unresolved conflict will inevitably lead to bitterness. You can't just pretend that you don't have an issue with someone and not deal with it and not grow bitter toward them. It's going to happen. And as you grow bitter toward them, you're going to be more prone to act toward them in an unloving way, in a sinful way. You're going to begin to gossip. You're right. I'm not going to go talk to you about this, but do you know what she did? Let me tell you what kind of guy he is. And they may have no idea that you even have a problem with them. It'll lead to mistreatment. It may be small mistreatments, right? If you don't want conflict, you may just look for the little jabs you can make, the look you can give, the snide remark that they're not quite sure, right? Passive aggression. Some of y'all don't know what this is, but there's this thing, subtweeting. So it's when on Twitter you tweet about somebody but not directly to them, so they know you're mad at them, but if they call you out on it, you can also be like, oh, no, that wasn't about you, it was about someone else. And some of y'all are on Twitter, but some of y'all are doing that on Facebook, or I doubt you're still on MySpace, hopefully not. But any situation where we want to exacerbate the problem, we want to talk about the person instead of to them, like that's passive aggressive. That's not resolving conflict. But if you refuse to resolve the conflict, those are the sorts of behaviors that you're going to fall into. And the more that we let that go on in a community, in a church, in a group of believers, the more fractures there are going to be. I had this great group of friends all through high school, and it fell apart largely because of small, unresolved conflicts. I've had family situations where there are family members that don't have anything to do with each other anymore. And the reality was there wasn't this big blow-up moment. There was just little, small things that no one ever wanted to deal with. It plays out in families. It plays out in friends groups. It can play out in a marriage. He's doing that one thing and it just drives me crazy and I'm never going to talk about it until one day you really do, right? And then it's like, whoa, where did this come from? Or maybe we never talk about it and we just drift apart and no one really knows why. It happens in your work relationships, the people you work alongside. It happens with your brothers and sisters in Christ. But for the Christian, that's not an acceptable approach to conflict. And it's obvious why. These things are not good things, right? We've all experienced these things. They're not pleasant. They're not good. They don't build anybody up. They just tear down. We have a responsibility to go and make peace, to go and make things right when we know there's an issue. And the interesting thing about this Matthew passage to me is Jesus doesn't say, if you go to offer your gift at the temple and they remember that you have a problem with your brother, he says, if you go and remember that your brother has a problem with you. So even if you're not the angry one, even if you are on the receiving end of the anger and you know that conflict is there unresolved, you still have the responsibility to go and make it right. But I get it, it's really uncomfortable. There are conflicts that I have avoided because they were just too uncomfortable. So how do we get to the point where we can actually confront these things, confront these problems? I think the first thing, obviously, is prayer. And that's not a pat answer. This is important. This is huge. We want God to be involved in this conflict, right? You want to pursue God's will in everything that you're doing. And a conflict, it drives me crazy sometimes when he says it to me and reminds me and takes the fire out of what I'm saying. But Bob is always telling me, conflict's an opportunity for growth. It can be an opportunity for something positive to happen. And it drives me crazy because he's right. I just want everyone to be mad at the same person I'm mad at. But that's not the purpose of conflict, and that's not the pursuit of peace either. It begins with prayer. We want to seek God's will. You may find that there are some things that I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's start here. First, you want to align yourself with the will of God. Prayer is not just us asking God for things, although we should. Ask God to be involved in this conflict. Ask God to make peace. But it also is, God, help me to pursue your will within this. What is your will within this conflict? Reveal that to me, and then you spend some time listening. And when you pray for the other person, but you also pray for yourself. And what I mean there, There's a specific thing that I like to pray when I'm in conflict with another person. And I would encourage you to start praying the same thing because it's going to lead to some humility that you're going to need. I pray, God, open this person's eyes to where they're wrong and open my eyes to where I'm wrong. Because it's easy in conflict for us to get this idea of, right, we're all the hero in our own story and anyone who opposes us is the villain. That's how we feel. But that's rarely how real life works out. Oftentimes, there are some things that I could have done better in this disagreement. And I need God to help make me aware of that so I can go into it with a realistic understanding of what's actually going on. And you also need to pray that God would help you in the pursuit of forgiveness. Because here's the thing. With that conflict looming, regardless of how that conflict plays out, you as a Christian, you're called to forgive, no matter how it works out. And if you don't, bitterness will continue to grow in you. And that's going to be a huge stumbling block for you spiritually. It's going to affect your prayer life. 1 John tells us that anyone who says they love God but doesn't love their brother whom they have seen is a liar. Because how can they love God whom they have not seen if they don't love their brother whom they have seen? Bitterness is a huge problem spiritually. You have to forgive. And everything I'm talking to you about today, don't take this as, hey guys, I'm great at conflict. Do all the things I've done. I am historically terrible at conflict, and I'm not sure who said they enjoyed conflict. I think it was Bob. I'm not sure. It was Bob or Todd. I heard one of you. I fall into that, but I can be a pretty angry person. So historically, forgiveness, huge thing that I struggle with. So if everything I'm saying right now, you're like, this is just impossible. I get it. I've been there. And you're not going to develop that by your sheer willpower. You're going to develop that by spending time with the Lord and letting Him transform you. And until you do, just rest in the fact that conflict is going to be pretty terrible for you. That wasn't very encouraging. It was kind of sarcastic. But for real, we need God's transforming work in our lives if we're going to handle conflict well. So first, you start with prayer. And then I think there's a really important question you have to ask yourself. Is this conflict the result of wrongdoing? Or is this conflict the result of a difference of opinion? Because how you approach this, it makes a big difference. There's this really cool thing about our particular branch of Christianity, the Restoration movement, that I really like. And it's really the reason that I'm part of the Restoration movement. Because theologically, I'm real weird, so I don't fit in the neat Restoration movement box. I probably shouldn't have said that today, but the saying that really drew me to this branch of Christianity was in essentials, liberty, in non-essentials, unity. Where the Bible speaks, we speak. Where the Bible's silent, we're silent. Where there are things that Scripture plainly says we are in agreement, but where there are things that there's room for opinion, we can have opinions and still love each other. And the end of that quote, I accidentally cut it off. It was, and in all things, love. Even in the essentials, if we wind up not agreeing, we still love. So I think in matters of opinion, love's got a rule. And in matters of opinion, it's okay to talk, but our posture needs to be seeking the truth together. Not I'm going to prove how wrong you are because I'm totally right. It needs to be, Dallas Willard talks about this. His book on apologetics, I love the title of it. So apologetics, if you don't know, is defending the faith through reason. And when you think about that, you think of like angry guy at a podium utterly destroying this atheist's argument, right? Checkmate, atheists. Dallas Willard's book on apologetics is called The Allure of Gentleness. That's our posture. We need to pursue truth together. And we may not wind up agreeing 100%. So if you are having a conflict with someone and it's the result of a difference of opinion, it's okay to go and seek the truth together with that person. That's an okay posture to have. But if an opinion is engendering bitterness toward your brother or sister, that's a you issue. That's not a them issue. And we need to develop this capacity to love even in the midst of disagreement. I think that's something sorely lacking these days. But now, if wrongdoing has occurred, that's a different story. you need to prepare a little more for that confrontation. If wrongdoing has occurred, first off, we've already talked about this, you're going to need to forgive. And until you do that, this conflict is going to be a huge, huge challenge for you. It's going to be hard to love somebody if you can't forgive the person. And forgiveness, I've struggled with that so much. There are plenty of people in my life who it's completely justifiable from a human perspective that I would harbor bitterness toward that person. But that's not the way of Jesus. That bitterness will destroy you. You've got to learn to let go of that. And so I have to spend time in prayer to forgive. Pray for the other person. Until you can get to the point where you actually pray for good things for the person, you haven't forgiven them. So when I say pray for the person, it's not, God, bring a fire to their house. Like, no. We can pray for the person in love. That's forgiveness. But I have to seek that from God. There are people in my life where I have to go to God over and over. God, help me forgive this person. There are people who, on a daily basis, I'm like, all right, I am forgiving this person for this thing that they did to me. I'm letting go of that. It's challenging. I get it. But as a Christian, it's something we have to pursue. We're called to pursue. And not only that, but there's freedom found in it. When you can't forgive somebody, you are enslaved to that feeling. You're enslaved to that person. They're still going to control how you're acting, even if they're not trying to. Jesus doesn't call us to forgiveness just because it's hard, just because it's right. But it's right because it's the life-giving thing. It's the life-bringing thing. The other thing you need to prepare for is to have humility. Accept that there may be things in this conflict that you could have done better. If you're going to confront somebody and you've already decided that you're completely right and they are completely wrong, that conflict's not going to go anywhere good. It's going to escalate to a shouting match, probably. I like reading about church history because I'm a nerd. And one of my favorite guys in church history is Ignatius of Loyola. He founded the Order of the Jesuits. And one of the things that the Jesuits encourage is to have the great assumption. The great assumption is assuming that the person that you're talking to had the best intentions. Because we tend to default to the opposite end. If somebody slighted us, they did it deliberately. They woke up that morning and they thought, I really hate that Larry guy. I can't wait to see him and slight him, right? That's how we think things go on. So often, conflict is really the result of just a misunderstanding. I can't tell you how many times that I finally worked up the courage to go and confront this problem because I know there's this problem. And what I get is, I don't even remember you doing that. I don't remember doing that myself. I don't remember that happening. Or, I'm sorry you took it that way. Here's what I did. Here's what I meant to do. Assume the best in people. Now, I know sometimes conflict will arise out of situations where there's no amount of good intention that offsets what's been done. And that's not what I'm talking about. But in some of these smaller conflicts, accept that the other person was probably just trying to do the best they could. And be ready to turn the other cheek as you approach confrontation. Because here's the thing. Most people are not good at conflict. You get good at things by doing them over and over. And we've already established that most people avoid confrontation as much as they can. And so when you never do a thing and the thing finally happens, it can get pretty ugly. You, as a follower of Jesus, are called to be a peacemaker. And your posture in seeking peace is to meet the standard of Jesus, not the standard of what other people are doing. And so when you go into a conflict, be ready to take some unhealthy approaches to conflict being thrown at you. And it may reach a point where you realize, all right, this isn't going anywhere. We got to stop having this conversation right now. Maybe take a break, maybe come back to it later. Maybe it's not going to go anywhere ever. But what you can't do is get pulled into the shouting and the personal attacks and that kind of thing. Be ready to turn the other cheek. This isn't popular in our culture. We live in the age of, watch this guy destroy this guy's argument in 90 seconds or less. And those are our idols, right? This hero of my way of thinking that can completely obliterate the opposition. That's not who we're called to be. Stop idolizing that. It doesn't produce anything but further conflict, further divisiveness. Be a person of love. Be a person who makes peace. And the other thing you have to think about when you are about to confront a conflict is, what are you aiming for? What are you trying to get out of this? Because sometimes that is our starting point. I want to obliterate this person. That's not what we're called to. We're called to be peacemakers. And we can see how God addresses conflict in a very direct way. In the 3rd chapter of Genesis, after the fall of man, we see God and how he deals with conflict, with confrontation. People have done wrong. It's undeniable. God said, do not do this thing. Man did the thing. Don't eat this fruit. We ate the fruit. God doesn't gloss over it. He doesn't pretend it didn't happen. He rolls in. He confronts it directly. And there are negative repercussions. There are curses that follow the sin. Death enters the world. Here are all these bad things that are going to happen now. But here's the thing about God. Even when he confronts us, he's always seeking the restoration of the person. In the midst of man's fall, in the midst of, here are all the bad things that are coming your way because of what you've done, God takes the time to take these people who are ashamed and naked and struggling to cover themselves, and he provides clothing for them made of skin, better quality clothing than what they had sewn together with fig leaves. He covers their shame, even in the midst of that confrontation. And we get a glimpse of what he's going to do. Serpent, you're going to bruise the woman's offspring's heel, but he's going to crush your head. We get this glimpse of one day, all this is going to be made right again. From the get-go, God didn't abandon man. God wasn't trying to, if God wanted to wipe man out right there, it's done, right? Oh, well, this was a nice experiment, but humans are not good. Gone. But that's not what he did. He confronted it seeking our restoration, initiating a plan where one day it was going to be made right again. God always seeks the restoration of the person, and that needs to be our goal in confrontation as well. If it's not, you're not going into a confrontation with a Christ-like view. If it's destroy the person, that is not like Jesus. God confronts to restore. Now, ideally in our conflicts, we'll find reconciliation with the person, the restoration of the relationship. Sometimes that's not a possibility. And sometimes you know that going into the conflict. And sometimes the confrontation is just, look, here's what's happened, and here are the boundaries that are going to be put up as a result of what's happened. That's all right. Man falls in the garden, God immediately puts up some boundaries. You're out of the garden. He prevented them from entering into the garden because they had become like him, knowing good and evil. And he said, we need to keep him out lest he eat from the tree of life and live forever. C.S. Lewis writes about that at one point as even that being a blessing. Because can you imagine somebody with a capacity for great evil also having the capacity to never taste death? Just evil getting worse and worse down through the ages? God put boundaries in place to prevent that, even though he was working toward the restoration of people. So what are you aiming for? We aim for restoration. We aim for reconciliation when possible. But there may be boundaries that need to be put in place for our safety, for our well-being, for the safety of our loved ones. And I think the other thing we need to consider as we approach confrontation is, how are we going to confront? And I think as much as it is possible, whenever you can do it, sitting down in person with somebody is the best thing to do. I know it's the most uncomfortable, but it's the best way to approach things. Where that absolutely can't happen, or you fear for your safety and you're just putting boundaries up, the written word may be an acceptable alternative. But the more correspondence you do with somebody in written word in the midst of conflict, the more misunderstanding there is going to be. So if you're just laying down boundaries, the written word may be fine. If you're worried about your safety, the written word is fine. But if you're actually working toward reconciliation, toward restoration of the relationship, It's not going to happen on the phone or on Facebook Messenger or by sending a letter. You need to sit down with the person. Another important verse for us to remember comes from Romans 12. Paul writes that as much as it depends on you, seek peace with all men. And that's an important thing to remember. As much as it depends on you, seek peace with all men. Because some people are not going to be open to confrontation. Sometimes a wrong has been done and you actually tried to do the right thing and sit down with the person and talk it out, and they're not going to receive it. They have no interest in doing it. And as much as you may want to force them into the confrontation, you can't really do that. But their response does not depend on you. You may actually get into the confrontation, have the conversation, and they will not do it well. They will not do it lovingly. It's nothing but personal attacks and screaming, and they're not going to talk. They're just going to talk at you. That doesn't depend on you. What depends on you is that you are loving in the conflict, that you actually pursue the confrontation that needs to happen. So, because I'm in a room full of humans, I know that I am in a room full of people with conflicts hanging over their heads. Most of you, if not all of you, are currently at odds with somebody, or you will be before this day is over, or before this week is over. It happens. Sometimes it's a huge deal. Sometimes it's not. I'm a really unbearable person when I'm sleepy and hungry. I'm like an infant. My wife has such a hard time. Sometimes she needs to just tell me to go eat something, and it's fine. What I'm getting at there is you're going to have conflict with the people in your families, in your immediate families, in your households. You're going to have conflict with your friends. You're going to have conflict with your coworkers. And some things we just let go, right? Like, I know that how old are my children? One's like 18 months or something, 20 months. It gets confusing. I'm tired. I know the 20-month-old didn't leave the lightsaber in the middle of the floor so that I would slip and fall and hit my head on the dresser. Like, it wasn't his goal. And so I can temper how I respond to that, right? There's some things you can let go. But where there is conflict, where there are things that are pushing you toward bitterness, talk it out with the person in a loving way, seeking reconciliation, restoration. How can we handle this better? As much as it depends on you. If there's one that's been hanging over your head for a long time, I want to urge you to stop letting it hang over your head. You know your brother or your sister has something against you. Go and make it right. To the best of your ability. Scratch that. To the best of God's ability working in your life. Pray. Follow God's lead. Ask Him to show you where you can be doing some things better. And whatever you do, do it in love. Bob's going to follow up on this in a few weeks. Things got kind of wonky, so Bob had a grandchild. And that's where he's at. He's visiting his new grandchild. And so things got kind of weird here. So this is kind of a weird place to put this challenge. But in a few weeks, Bob's going to talk more specifically about how we actually handle ourselves in the midst of conflict. What I've talked to you about is the need to confront and what we need to do on the front end preparing for the confrontation. In a few weeks, Bob's going to talk about conflict more in depth. So if right now you're like, okay, I get it, I need to confront things, I get what I need to consider, but I still really don't feel like I can do that. Good news for you. Here in a couple weeks, we'll talk more about that. In the meantime, what I want you to do right now, there are pins all around you, there are Connect cards, you got bulletins, you got a hand here that you could write things on if you need to. I want you to grab a pen. I want you to think about, it probably won't take you long. Is there a conflict hanging over your head? And if there is, I want you to write something down on a sheet of paper, on your hand, whatever. It could be the person's name, something denoting the conflict. If you're weird like me and you're like, everyone's always trying to know what I'm writing about and you aren't comfortable, draw a picture or a symbol, whatever. I don't care. Something that you're going to remember. And I want you to go ahead and start praying about this conflict. Pray that God would help you to forgive, that He would open your eyes and open their eyes, that there could be reconciliation if it's possible, that the person can be restored, even if it's a person that your relationship can't be restored with them because of how badly you've been wronged, because they've done something truly terrible. We still want to see that person redeemed. Even if our relationship can't be the same, we still want to see that person redeemed. I love it when God transforms people that I think are just completely beyond the pale of being restored. It's incredible to watch. We still want to pray for that. I want you to start praying for that person every day, multiple times a day. When you're washing dishes and you remember what they did and you're like, ah, stop, pray, forgive. And if you feel comfortable approaching that confrontation, now do it. If you don't, here in a few weeks when we talk about conflict, after that message, I want you to go talk with that person. Let's pray. Father, I thank you for this day.
Thank you for joining us. You can find us on the web at cornerstonechatham.org.